Something extraordinary is happening in Australia. The country that for decades prided itself on multiculturalism above all else. The country whose political class told its citizens that any concern about mass Islamic immigration was racism. The country whose police force stood by for years while radical preachers called for the destruction of Western civilization from Australian pulpits. Yeah, that same country just passed the most sweeping anti-Islamist crackdown in its entire history. It just banned a major radical Islamic organization outright, and as you can see, it sent police officers to physically break up Muslims praying in a public square. And the political left is having a complete and total meltdown. But here's the thing. There's something even bigger happening beneath the surface of this story. The moment Australia was forced to choose between Islamism and their own civilization, and there's no going back. Hey gang, it's me, Dr. Steve, your patron professor, here to help you make sense of the madness with breaking news and analysis you're not going to get anywhere else. So make sure to smack that bell and subscribe button. It all started on the night of December 14th, 2025, a Hanukkah festival at Bondi Beach in Sydney, Australia. Families gathered, children present, lights, music, celebration, and then two ISIS-inspired gunmen, a father and a son, opened fire. And when the smoke cleared, 15 people lay dead. And for the Australian government, it was the moment they could no longer look away. Within weeks, Australia's parliament passed what they called the Combating Anti-Semitism, Hate and Extremism Act of 2026, which cracked down particularly on radical preachers calling for jihad from Australian mosques, with up until then zero legal consequences. Well, that era of zero legal consequences is now officially over in Australia. The law also specifically targeted religious leaders who promoted violence from the pulpit. So if you use a position of religious authority to incite hatred, you're now going to prison. Third, the law gives new powers for the Home Affairs Minister to cancel or refuse visas for any foreign hate preacher trying to enter the country, such that the days of importing extremist imams from the Middle East are officially finished. And then fourth, and this is the big one, a new listing regime to ban organizations that promote extremism, even if they don't quite meet the formal terrorism threshold. Now, this is a massive turnaround for the Australian government because for years, the problem in Australia and across the West in general has been that radical Islamist groups were able to operate in a sort of gray zone. So they're not technically blowing things up, so they can't be banned as terrorists, but they are openly calling for the destruction of Western democracy and civilization and recruiting the next generation of jihadists and poisoning communities from within. So they push the notion that Western civilization is the ultimate evil and that faithfulness to God requires one to do everything in their power to ultimately destroy that civilization. Australia just officially closed that loophole. And the very first organization to be banned under this new law was the radical Islamist group Hizb ut-Tahrir. Now, if you don't know Hizb ut-Tahrir, they're a global Islamist splinter movement with a single stated goal: the establishment of a worldwide Islamic caliphate. They openly reject Western values. They openly reject democracy. They reject the Australian Constitution. They reject the concept of the nation state itself. And they've been operating openly in Australia for decades. And now, membership recruitment, funding, or support for Hizb ut-Tahrir carries up to 15 years in prison. Not a fine, not a warning, 15 years behind bars. This is the first time Australia has ever banned an organization purely on extremism grounds without a formal terrorism designation. It's a legal landmark. And it's sending a message that's being heard in every radical mosque and Islamist community center across the country. The free ride is over. The reality is that Australia is indeed starting to wake up here. The Muslim population in Australia has grown faster than almost any other religious group in the country, and surveys consistently show that a significant subset hold views on democracy, free speech, women's rights, the role of religion in government that are fundamentally incompatible with Australian law and tradition. And the Bondi massacre was clearly a breaking point. Since then, a number of activists have been charged for chanting "From the river to the sea" after it was banned in Queensland. A Melbourne night market in Muslim-majority suburbs has been designated a stop-and-search zone where police are granted special legal powers to stop any person within that zone and search them without needing the usual, legal requirement of reasonable suspicion that the individual is committed or is about to commit a crime. There are multiple reports that these stop-and-search zones are inordinately targeting Muslim communities throughout Australia. And apart from far-left protests, the vast majority of the country is fully supportive of it. And they're not alone. What's happening in Australia is indeed happening all over the Western world. There is a civilizationalist awakening that's effectively pushing back against what many believe to be incompatible civilizations that are increasingly being seen as invaders. And the efforts to expel them are just beginning. But first, gang, let's face it. You had a number in your head, right? The number you thought would be enough to retire. And then the price of life went up and up and up. And now the question isn't whether you saved, it's whether what you saved can still buy the retirement you planned for. I mean, think about what's happening right now. War flaring up, oil spikes, and then everything gets higher. Gas, groceries, insurance, bills. We've seen this before. We're watching a structural shift in the global economy where inflation isn't temporary. It's embedded. And historically, when that happens, purchasing power doesn't recover. It erodes. Your dollar buys less. Your savings carry less. And people who are counting down to retirement, they start wondering if they got to push it back, all because the cost of living moved the finish line. That was my wake-up call. I knew there had to be something else I could do to protect what I built, so I researched, and that's when I found Augusta Precious Metals. And gang, they taught me things I didn't even know were possible. I had no idea you could move your IRA or 401k into physical gold, tax-free, penalty-free, a real asset that's held its value through war, oil spikes, and market chaos. And that changed everything for me. I've spoken with Augusta's education team. These guys know their stuff, and they explain it so clearly. So here's what I recommend you do right now. Go to turleybuysgold.com or text Turley to 35052 to get Augusta's free gold IRA guide. That's turleybuysgold.com or text Turley to 35052 because the retirement you dreamed of is still possible, but only if you protect it. Something seismic is happening all across the Western world, and Australia is one of the most dramatic proving grounds. From the streets of Sydney to the chambers of Brussels, from the polling booths of Germany to the halls of the United States Congress, a single political force is rising with a speed and coherence that has left the establishment utterly flat-footed. It's called civilizational populism. The conviction that Western nations have a right and indeed a duty to defend their cultural identity, their borders, and their civilizational inheritance against forces that seek to dismantle them from within. Now, the pattern is absolutely consistent everywhere you look. Mainstream center-left parties that spent decades championing open borders, mass immigration, and multicultural progressivism are literally hemorrhaging political support. Populist right parties that were once dismissed as fringe and extreme and far right, They're surging into the mainstream with breathtaking speed. In Germany, the AfD has recently broken records. They're number one party in the country. In France, Marine Le Pen's National Rally has become the dominant political force there. In Britain, Nigel Farage's Reform UK shattered their two-party system. And here in the United States, Donald Trump ran the table twice on a platform of civilizational defense. And now it's Australia. And it's stunning. You know, after their 2025 federal election delivered a commanding Labour majority, it did seem, at least for a while, that Australian populism had collapsed in defeat. Now, just months later, that same government that was supposed to be the epitome of tolerance and wokeness, they've now produced some of the most draconian crackdowns on Islamic activity in the nation's history. At the same time, Pauline Hanson's One Nation Party, once dismissed as a far-right relic, they've surged to 27% national polling, overtaking the mainstream Liberal National Coalition for the very first time in its 29-year history. Political scientists called it the fastest rise they had ever witnessed, and if what we're seeing in Europe is any indicator, you ain't seen nothing yet. One Nation's influence on Australia's post-Bondi legislative response is direct and unmistakable, even in defeat. When the Labour government rushed through the legislation that shut down radical organizations like the Hizb ut-Tahrir, it was the political pressure generated by One Nation's surge and by Hanson's unrelenting Senate speeches exposing Hizb ut-Tahrir as an organization calling for a global caliphate from Australian soil. That forced the Liberal government to crack down on these organizations. It was a legislative victory that bore One Nation's fingerprints. The Overton window doesn't shift by itself. It's dragged by movements like One Nation in Australia, or by Reform UK in Britain, or by the AfD in Germany, by Trump in America, until what was once unspeakable actually ends up becoming the law of the land. That's the story of civilizational populism in the West. And Australia, for all its reputation as a multicultural success story, has just written one of its most consequential chapters. Before you go, if you're not in the Courageous Patriots Club yet, you're missing our weekly deep dives, Monday night Q&A, and a community of patriots who actually think. Link below. Come join us.